let's continue on with our lesson 4. All right. So our first part starts with noticing a couple of things and wondering what's going on. So let me give you a second or so, a couple of seconds obviously, to take a look at our first function, f, and compare what's happening between f and g. And then also see if you can find out what's happening between f and h. So always thinking about f as our original function. What's going on from f to g? What's going on from f to h? When you have that idea, jot it down below the graph so you can have an idea about what's going on so we can see what we might be finding. Liv, what seems to be happening between f and g? All right, reflecting over the x-axis. Nice. So we took everything in f and we reflected it over the x-axis. Everything that was above the x-axis got flipped down below it. Everything that was below it got flipped up above it. And so what we did is we flipped it upside down. We reflected it over the x-axis. Let's put both of those kinds of terminology down below. We reflected over the x-axis. We can also say that we flipped it upside down. What we have is a vertical flip going on here. We want to use all of these terms together. We have a vertical flip upside goes down, downside becomes up, and we reflect it over the x-axis. The way we would write this equation, we know that that's where we're going for each of our new steps that we're adding. With our A, C, H, and K, we've been focusing so far on H and K, but we're going to start dipping our toes into A's and C's going on here. All right. What we start to see is that we aren't changing any x values at all. We aren't changing anything side to side. Instead, we have changed it top and bottom. We have taken every positive y value, like this line up here at positive 2, got flipped down here to negative 2. So we took our f of x function. We didn't change the x values at all. We just took every y output and made it negative. We took every negative output and we made it positive. All we needed to do for this is to have a negative of all of our outputs of f of x. Would you write that equation here in our warm-up? We're negating every single output. We are flipping it upside down. We are reflecting it over the y-axis. We are not touching our x's at all. Justin, what do you think is going on then between f and h? Not sure. Let's see if we can start to break this down into some parts. Or Taylor can help us. Yeah, Taylor, what are you noticing? All right, it flips over the y-axis. How did you know that? This part here? Nice. All right, so this kind of tail, I kind of looked at that too. I start looking for some kind of part of the graph that is very distinct. And I saw this part here where it's like a down, up, over. And I noticed that over here it's on the other side, it's at the beginning part, and it goes over, down, up. So it took the whole thing and it reflected it over the y-axis. Nice, let's add that idea down here. Reflect over the y-axis. Instead of flipping upside down like our first one did, we see that this is flipping side to side. It's flipping left and right. So what was on the right side of the graph is now on the left side of the graph. What was on the left side of the y-axis is now on the right side of the y-axis. And we can take a very distinct point, 1, 2, 3, 4, like this one here at 4, +1, and we can find now that same exact point here at -4, +1. Oh, yeah, so you see how it's just bringing it over here, so it's going -4 and still going that +1. So notice how I'm not changing the y coordinate at all. I'm making the x coordinate negative. So our function here would look like h of x is the f of x function, that same graph, but we turned every x negative. We're going to put the negative side inside with the x value because we took every x and we made it opposite. This is a horizontal reflection. And we're doing it because we're changing the horizontally that way. We're not flipping it upside down over the horizon. We're flipping it horizontally from left to right. Let me capture that thinking. That's really our whole big idea right there for lesson 4, as we're starting to move these things in some other different ways. We saw this earlier when we were watching end behaviors happen. Remember when we had that whole study of end behaviors, and if it had an odd degree, we were like, oh, it's going up on one side and down on the other. But as soon as it had a negative leading coefficient, it changed that end behavior to what was opposite. It flipped the whole thing upside down. There's that leading coefficient right there turning negative that flipped that whole graph upside down, right? Or we had something that looked like this. We're like, ooh, let's make it positive, and it flipped the whole thing upside down. It was all about that leading coefficient, whether it was positive or negative. And that's our idea here about flipping upside down and flipping it over the x-axis. So if we look at something like 4.2, we want to look at the equation to see what the change is. And I notice that the negative is out in front. It's going to take every output and turn it negative. So the entire f of x column that they have here, when we negate that column, well, negative 4.3 is going to turn into a positive 4.3. Negative 4 is going to turn into a positive 4. Negative 4.3 is going to turn into a positive 4.3. Negative 4 is going to turn into a positive 4. Negative 1.8 is going to turn into a positive 1.8. 0 is neither positive nor negative. It's going to stay put right where he is. All of our zeros are going to stay put right where they are. And our positive 3.9 will turn into a negative 3.9. We can reflect our entire graph upside down. Every y value, every output value that we have is negated. So the bottom becomes the top becomes the bottom. See how speedy this is? This is it. This is all. We're just like, oh, okay. We're gonna just flip some stuff over and see where we're ending up. So we can flip all of our output values. That means we can also flip all of our input values. Let's take a look at the next section, section 4.3. We're going to fill it in just as fast and connect those dots just as quickly. This one is telling us that instead of negating our output values, we're going to negate the input. This time our outputs are going to stay exactly the same. It's our input that's going to flip. So instead of negative 3, 0, we're going to have a positive 3, 0. The x changes its sign. So instead of negative 3, 0 here, we're going to have positive 3, 0 here. Instead of negative 1.5, negative 4.3, we're going to have positive 1.5, negative 4.3. Output stays the same. Our x column, our y column is exactly the same. Put our negative 1.5. Now I'm just going to flip right over here. Negative 1, negative 4 turns into a positive 1, negative 4. Fill out the rest of this table. We're making some connections with these points here. 0 is neither positive nor negative. It's going to sit tight right where it was. So our y-intercept stays exactly the same. End behaviors stay the same here. We're just flipping our end behavior also left and right. So instead of flipping it top and bottom, we'll flip our end behavior left and right. So we've taken our end behavior that was looking like this, and we flipped it. So now our end behavior is looking like this, down. Took the whole graph and reflected it. What questions do you have for me on lesson 4 before we get to the cool down? I mean, that's it. That's the whole thing. Can you believe how fast that? I love it. This is why I love Unit 5 so much. It's my fave. It's my absolute fave. Let's take care of our lesson 4 cool down just to make sure that you've got this idea. Now, this one's kind of challenging. A lot of students are like, I can do this. This is great. This is super easy. It starts to get confusing because of different colors. So if you need some different colored pencils or highlighters, I've got them for you. If it's helpful to work in some different colors, do so. All right. So I'm going to put a stack of them just right here. If you're okay with that. I'll put some highlighters over here. Different colors might be helpful. I see actually a student who's making a table of values that might be helpful as well. If you're looking at some independent points. But we need to graph our function G and X and then label them with those different colors. So I'm going to try doing one of them in red, the first one. The negative is out front. It's changing the output values, not changing the X. Instead, it's going to flip it top to bottom. It's a vertical flip over, a vertical reflection. So my end behaviors, I do still start there. My end behaviors that were up, up, are now going to be down, down. Every point that was below the x-axis is now going to come above the x-axis. Every point above the x-axis is now going below. Upside down, flip over going on, top to bottom. Nice, I'm seeing lots of success. I had to do this better this time around. In the past, people were like, I don't know which of my points I'm connecting to. It starts to get really confusing. Start with that end behavior. Very good. All right. So we should have one that started with down in behavior, hit a peak at about negative 1.4, positive 0.8, dipped down for our y-intercept at negative 2, upward, hit a maximum, and then continue back down. So maximums become minimums, minimums become maximums. Our second one, I'll do it in a different color. Again, more colored pencils if you like doing it that way. It's much easier to see in a different color. Or highlighter. This does change the X. We're going to change everything that was a positive x and make it negative, everything that was a negative x and make it positive. Our end behavior is going to go with us too. So our end behavior that was up, end behavior is just turning around like this, and it's still going to stay up, end behavior. Minimums stay minimums, maximums stay maximums. But we're taking that whole graph and flipping it left to right, side to side, over the y-axis. I'm done. This is perfect. We've still got like 5 minutes of time, 5-6 minutes of time left. Use this time to complete your practice for lesson 3. I asked you yesterday to complete lesson 2 practices. Please complete lesson 3 tonight. We'll have a chance to review these tomorrow and make sure that you're up to speed with how we translate left, right, up, and down. I'll put on some music. Let me know how to be helpful to you, but please stay with math so you are taking care of your practice problems. Try to cut down your homework that you've got at home.